Grab your Bibles, go with me to, first Ephesians chapter 1 verse 7, and then if you can make your way back to Leviticus chapter 16. I said Leviticus chapter 16. I know, Leviticus 16. Now, the priest's handbook is where we're going to end up, and kind of fascinating back there. Your song goes perfectly with what we're going to be talking about tonight, Audley, so I'm glad you got to sing it. We've been going through large sections of Scripture, preaching through books, preaching through chapters, preaching really through broad areas, and we've been. God led me to begin to do some studies, maybe small words with big meanings. Small words with big meanings, maybe is the theme of what we're going to be talking about. We talked about access the last time that we dealt with this sort of a subject, and the Greek word behind access, and how God gives us access to Him and what that means. I want to talk to you about a small word in the English and a smaller word in the Greek, and it's really the word forgiveness. God delights to forgive us. He wants to forgive us. He has literally orchestrated a mechanism to forgive us through the death of His Son on the cross. He's given us a way to be forgiven. That's an amazing thing. We were wretches, every one of us, wretches. Our feet were swift to shed blood. Our mouths were open sepulchres. Were we judged by our work, we would die and go to hell, all of us. But we received, as blood-bought, born-again believers, forgiveness from God. What does that mean? Let's look at that. Let's look at the Ephesians 1:7. In whom we have redemption through His blood, the forgiveness of sins according to the riches of His grace. In whom we have redemption through His blood, the forgiveness of sins according to the riches of His grace. In this context, forgiveness is directly linked with redemption. The remission of sins rests on redemption. There's this distinct forgiveness where God wipes the slate clean, bearing away all of our shortcomings. The Greek word that is here is aphesis, and I don't know if the ph is pronounced with an F. I assume it makes an F sound. Aphesis maybe is what I'm thinking. It comes from apo, which means from, and then hemi, almost like the Dodge Hemi engine, which means to put in motion or to send. I wonder if that's where they got that word hemi, is from this Greek word to put in motion or to send. And it literally depicts sending something away or putting apart. The root meaning of forgiveness is to put away an offense. The express idea is one of letting go of sin. The secular Greek literature related this word was used to indicate the sending away of an object or a person. It came to include the release of someone from an obligation, a debt, a religious vow. In its final form, the word group came to embrace a principle release from punishment or from some wrongdoing. This idea of forgiveness by sending away, getting rid of that sin, where it's removed as far as the east is from the west, where it's cast away from God and not remembered anymore. It's removed from you so that you're not living in the sin anymore. It's put away from us. It's this idea of sending away. And then I was drawn this week to Leviticus 16 and this idea of the scapegoat. And I'm sure I can't be the first person that's come up with a connection between forgiveness, meaning sending away, and a scapegoat who has the sins of Israel confessed on it and sent away. Surely I'm not the first to do that, so I must be in good company with others who already figured that out and cracked the code. But here it is. Let's read a little bit about the scapegoat and then make some analogy to how help us understand forgiveness. In verse 7 of Leviticus 16, and he shall take the two goats and present them before the Lord at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And Aaron shall cast lots upon the two goats, and one lot for the Lord, and the other lot for the scapegoat. And Aaron shall bring the goat upon which the Lord's lot fell, and offer him for a sin offering. But the goat on which the lot fell to be the scapegoat shall be presented alive before the Lord to make an atonement with him, to let him go for a scapegoat into the wilderness. And when he had made an end of reconciliation, the holy place, and the tabernacle of the congregation, and the altar, he shall bring the live goat. And Aaron shall lay both his hands upon the head of the live goat, and confess over him all the iniquities of the children of Israel, and all their transgressions, in all their sins, putting them upon the head of the goat, and shall send him away by the hand of a fit man into the wilderness. And the goat shall bear upon him all their iniquities unto a land not inhabited, And he shall go, and he shall let go the goat in the wilderness. And he that let go the goat, verse 26, and he that let go the goat for the scapegoat shall wash his clothes and bathe his flesh in water, and afterward come into the camp. The key truth here that you and I want to understand is this. Number one, Jesus Christ forgives us of our sins. Hold on to that, because that's the most precious truth you will ever come across in all of your life. There are wonderful things to discover, but the most wonderful is to discover that no matter what kind of a wretched state I might find myself, I can find forgiveness from God. He can wash me and cleanse me and make me whiter than snow. He can do a supernatural work in my life. When I couldn't fix my sin, He can fix my sin. He can forgive my sin and through this sacrifice. And then, not only that though, but He can also send the guilt away. I have wondered how I have mental illness that's in my family, that runs in my family. And I've wondered how you break down mental illness and where it comes from. I think there's a component of mental illness that's biological. It has to do with the working of the brain, the release and uptake of certain chemicals that are there. I think there's a component of mental illness that's physical. There's a physical element that's to it. There's a component of mental illness that's emotional, that deal how we emote and how we deal with emotions, either keeping them in or expressing them in a wrong way. I think there's a component of mental illness that may be spiritual, where there's a spiritual component to it. Now, I'll give you an example. I'm not telling you tales out of school. My dad lived a rough young life. I mean, he was the hardest drinker as I've ever met. I don't know anybody that drank as hard as he did. And to this day, he struggles with guilt. Sometimes it almost cripples him. And I can't do anything about the biological. I can't fix the physical. I can't do kind of some of those things. But how I approach him when I'm talking to him is this concept of forgiveness and how God can take away the guilt. Once you've confessed, and he has confessed, and he's confessed to me and to God, and I mean, he's been very open about what's going on and how he needs forgiveness for that. And I explained to him that once you've confessed to God, He forgives you. And God is a gentleman and always honors His word. And if He says He will forgive you, He will forgive you. God is as good as His promise. And so I have to reiterate some of these verses that we're going to go over a little bit later, because I want to help him to get out from under that anguish. I want him to know that he can let the goat go. It's the let go goat. You can get it out of there. You don't got to hold on to the goat. You don't got to have the goat. Goats are freaky. I mean, I don't know if you ever seen them up close. My brother Jerry, he's scared of them, man. I mean, Michelle used to have a goat. Actually, her grandkids had a goat, but she had the goat because the grandkids had a goat or something. It was Pang. He lived out there. And Jerry went out there with me a couple of times to work on a truck that I had that was broken down, and Wilbert had let us use an A-frame to pull an engine out. Because when I change a spark plug, you end up pulling an engine, is how it works when I change spark plugs. And it's a long, ugly story. It was the tune-up that cost me $3,000. Yeah. It was an expensive tune-up that I gave myself. But anyway, Jerry would go out there, and that goat every time would rear up and try to butt him. I don't know what it is about goats, and they don't like Jerry, man. It was coming up trying to get him, and Jerry's like, "Can I shoot her goat?" "You can't shoot Michelle's goat, man. It's wrong." And he's like, "Isn't it the devil?" Look, leave it alone, Jerry. Just leave the goat alone. But they're kind of freaky looking, but they teach us a powerful lesson. You don't want that goat following you around everywhere you go. God wants you to learn to get rid of your goat and deal with that guilt, that false guilt that follows you all of your life. Get rid of it, because once God has forgiven you, it's forgiven, done, taken care of, settled. The old account was settled long ago. There are two goats that are here. And really they represent one sacrifice. The two goats, what's going on is the day, he's describing the Day of Atonement in Leviticus 16. Let me give you just a brief outline. But in this Day of Atonement, the high priest, dressed in white, in a very plain sort of white linen, would go in this one day a year, he would go into the Holy of Holies, and there would be multiple offerings actually that are offered on this day. There is going to be an offering that he will offer for himself and for his family, a bullock that he will offer. And he will sprinkle blood. He will go in and he will sprinkle blood, and there will be a sprinkling of blood 7 times on the mercy seat, and it represents the complete sprinkling that's there. There's going to be the sacrifice later of one of the goats that will be offered, and there's a sprinkling, there's a sacrifice that kind of goes on there, and it represents kind of a cleansing of the Holy of Holies and then the holy place, and then sort of the rest of the people of Israel, and there's a a cleansing that goes on there. And it's a picture. There's so many pictures here that all point to Jesus. I mean, so much of it points to Jesus. And I had a confusion in my mind. The Passover lamb, the sacrifice for that is done in the first month of the Hebrew calendar. But the Day of Atonement is like the 7th month in the Hebrew calendar. And almost like it kind of, these two very powerful religious holidays bookend their year a little bit. Almost like our Easter and our Christmas bookend our year in religious holidays. They had the Passover lamb and the Day of Atonement, where these two major sacrifices caused the children of Israel 2 times a year to really do a moral house cleaning. I mean, to go through and to check out what's going on in their heart and their life to make sure they've done business with God and are taking care of those sin issues that may crop up in their lives. And so the sins of the people here are really the picture of pardon and of forgiveness flows from the death of this first goat. And by the way, this Passover goat, it's the word, the Hebrew word here is beyond me to say, but Azel, and some scholars thought that it was a name of a place, but it simply means, if you break down the two Hebrew words, it means it breaks down to the go away goat. I mean, the goat that's sent away. You know, it literally means that. It means something that's sent away. Tyndale recognized what it was, and Barnes talks about this going away goat that's there. We need to have that go away goat. Here's, Christ will forgive you. Look at verse 20. When he hath made an end of the reconciliation, of reconciling the holy place, and the tabernacle of the congregation and the altar, he shall bring the live goat. In other words, this scapegoat only comes into play after the sacrifice of the first goat. Now, this is important. The chronology is important. Because if there was just a scapegoat, it might be just sort of denying, I don't really have any sins. I'm just trying to forget about my sins. I don't want to think about them anymore, so I send the sin away. That's not how it works. The sin is dealt with by the sacrificial goat first. The blood is shed. There's no remission of sin without the shedding of blood. The blood is shed. Then, after that, the confession is made over the goat. Then the goat's sent away. So you can't get rid of your guilt until you get rid of your sin. Modern counseling, a lot of it is we just try to make everybody feel good about the sin that they're in. So you tell me any kind of horrible thing about yourself, and I just try to, it's okay. You just go ahead and keep sinning like a heathen dog, and it'll all be okay. You know, just quit feeling guilty. That's not how you get rid of guilt. How you get rid of guilt is you get rid of the infestation that's there, of the inflammation, the sickness, the thing that's causing it, and then a healing takes place. It's funny how time repeats itself. The other day, Tony and I had gone out and we'd tried to shoot a bow and arrow, and he got a little stick and picked it up after we shot the arrows, and he ran a sliver into his hand right where I ran a sliver into my hand. I have doing exactly the same thing. I got a sliver in my hand, only I was scared to let my mom cut the sliver out. My hand got so infected I couldn't hardly close my fingers because they swelled up big. And finally I went to my mom and I let her cut that sliver out, and it hurt when she cut it out because I'd let it go way too long. And she cut it out, and almost not long after she cut it out, that dude healed right up, and that was no problem because the source of the infection was taken out. Unless I get the sin taken out, dealt with by this first sacrifice, then the scapegoat doesn't mean anything. Then I can't get rid of the guilt because I've still got the source of the guilt problem still in there. That's why modern counseling that just kind of goes, well, just feel good about yourself, hug yourself, love yourself, you're really cool, doesn't work. It won't fix anything because it doesn't deal with the root problem that's there, and the root problem so often within us is this issue of sin. Listen to what Ray Stedman says about forgiveness. He says, you see, forgiveness is not an easy thing for God to display. He cannot do as many people seem to think He can. They simply look at our evil and say, oh well, that's all right, forget about it, I love you anyway, just go on. If that were the case, God would not be a just God. But God is just, and in a sense, His justice struggles with His love. His justice says, everybody who deliberately commits transgression must be set aside or cast out of my presence. He cannot come before me. This book, the Bible, teaches that again and again. God's justice excludes us from the presence. and sends us away. If God were just and only just, He would wipe out the human race without exception. No one of us could stand. But God's love doesn't want to do that. So yet how can His love be expressed unless His justice is satisfied? That's what the death of Christ does. When God's Son hung on the cross, God did not spare Him a thing. He poured out upon Him every bit of wrath against sin. In other words, God didn't let up just because it was Jesus. That's why Jesus says, my God, why hast Thou forsaken me? You got to understand, Jesus is the second person of the Trinity. They have coexisted as a Trinity from eternity in the past and will until eternity in the future. And for the second person of the Trinity to say, God the Father, why have you forsaken me, the second person of the Trinity? That's a pretty big thing. God dumped His wrath down on Jesus because of my sin, your sin. And it says, every bit of His justice was satisfied in the death of His Son upon the cross. Thus God is vindicated. And the whole world can now look at that event and say, yes, God is just, even though He loves us. The death of Jesus freed God to show His love to us. Apart from His death, you and I would never have known that He was a God of mercy and of compassion and a tender, forgiving God. That's an amazing thing about God. It's an amazing thing about the cross. That's why Easter is such a big deal. Because it teaches us something fundamental, two fundamental things about the character and nature of God. He's holy and He's loving. Both of those are demonstrated on the cross. So, only way that our sin can be forgiven and then finally dealt with, the guilt of it dealt with by the scapegoat, is after the sacrifice is made. Fortunately, you and I, Christ was that sacrifice, that once for all sacrifice, the perfect one that the one goat exemplified and that the Passover lamb typified. He is that perfect sacrifice. He's even the typification of the sacrifice for the lepers that's also mentioned here. But anyway, there's so much here in this handbook that points to Jesus. Then this goat is brought forward. Once the lots were cast, the high priest, one of the things that I read said a high priest, once the lot was cast determining which goat would be sacrificed and which goat would be the scapegoat, the go-away goat, what he would do is the go-away goat would get a piece of red cloth tied around a horn, and the goat that was the Lord's would have a red cloth tied around its neck. And then the sacrifice would go from there, and the scapegoat would go through the process that would take place for it to be sent out by the fit man that was going to take it. And so this goat will be brought forward, and brought forward in front of the people, and would face the people with the high priest there, just like Jesus and Pilate, when Jesus was presenting Pilate, or Pilate was presenting Jesus to the people and trying to say, you need to let Him go, He hasn't committed any sins. And similar to that sort of a scenario, He is brought out there, the goat is facing the people, and then confession is made over this goat. In verse 21, and Aaron shall lay both his hands upon the head of the live goat and confess over him all the iniquities of the children of Israel and all their transgression and all their sins, putting them upon the head of the goat, and shall send him away by the hand of a fit man into the wilderness. I've been asked by people, do you pray generally for forgiveness and specifically for forgiveness? I pray both, but I tell you what, I be as specific as I possibly can. Because I want God to forgive me specifically. I don't want kind of just a general forgiveness. I want forgiveness for whatever I've done. And my thing is I try to keep short accounts with God. If I know that as soon as God makes me aware of some moral failure, something in my life that does not belong there, I confess it immediately. I try to, as soon as I can, I confess. I try not to put it off any time. I want to keep short accounts with God. And I try to be as specific as I can, because the Bible, when it talks about confession, it means to say the same thing, homologos, to say the same thing about my sin that God says about my sin. So I want to call it what He calls it, sin. I don't want to try to make an excuse for it, rename it as a disorder, dysfunction, whatever. I want to say it is a sin. I did this. It was wrong. It was wicked and iniquity. It doesn't belong in my life. Please forgive me. And so I'm convinced that when Aaron was confessing the sins of Israel, he was as specific as possible over that goat, because I want specific relief from specific guilt. I need to have specific confession. That's going to help me to be able to get the freedom and forgiveness that I desperately need. So, the dying goat represents the essence of the sacrifice. The go-away goat represents the effect of the sacrifice, where one goat represents pardon, the other represents the release from the guilt and the freedom from the emotional bondage that came from that sin. Because you got to understand, let me use an analogy of an elephant, and I know you've heard this before. Have anybody here ever seen a circus? I've seen a circus. Sometimes they'll use elephants to set up the tents and stuff. They're amazing animals. Do you know how they train those elephants to stand? You'll go there and you'll see them staked to a little stake that's drove in the ground, and you know good and well that elephant can lift a pole up this big and set it up right. You know good and well he can yank his foot and pull that tent peg out. But when they're little, they stake them out and they put that chain on them, and the elephant gets used to, when at first it tries to pull and it can't get loose, and eventually it stops trying to pull because it realizes that it can't get loose, so it doesn't even try. Here's what Satan does with guilt in my life. If I've received forgiveness, but I haven't understood that there's a scapegoat principle that takes away my sin so that I don't have to live in that emotional guilt and bondage anymore. I don't have to live in that trauma and drama and all the emotional garbage that Satan tries to put on me. If I don't understand the scapegoat thing, I'm just going to stand there in the guilt of my sin and not ever do anything. Not ever accomplish anything for God, not ever try anything for God, not ever move forward in my walk with God, because after all, I'm defining myself by something that actually God sent away. So I need to see it as sent away. And that scapegoat, I think, helps us to begin to see this differently. Let's listen to some passages. Okay. I know, I'm editing really quickly here. Christ will send your guilt away. Look at verse 21. And Aaron shall lay both his hands upon the head of the goat and confess over him all the iniquity of the children of Israel, all their transgressions, all their sins, putting them upon the head of the goat, and shall send them away by the hand of a fit man into the wilderness. And the goat shall bear upon him all their iniquities into a land not inhabited, and he shall go, and he shall let go the goat in the wilderness. That wilderness was a land that's cut off, a land that didn't have anybody in it. A place of no return is the concept that's in the Amplified. Christ, having died on the cross for our sins, bore them away, no more to return to us. He took them away from us. He doesn't want us to live in even the residual junk of sin. He wants us to get rid of that stuff and to live separate from sin, live a sanctified life. He doesn't want us to live in that garbage that was there before. I think that's what Ephesians 4:9 means when it says, now that He ascended, what is it? But He also descended first in the lower parts of the earth. And He that descended is the same also that ascended up far above all heavens, that He might fill all things. And I think there was a work that was going on the part of Christ that had something to do with this that I don't totally understand, and probably we won't until we get to heaven, but He was doing something there to bring liberty to us. Isaiah 53:6 talks about this in sheep language. It says, all we like sheep have gone astray. We've turned every one to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on Him the iniquity of us all. That's a powerful thing. God laid on Jesus the iniquity of us all, because that's who He's talking about. Isaiah 44:22. I have blotted out as a thick cloud thy transgression, and as a cloud thy sins. Return unto me, for I have redeemed thee. God's saying, I blotted out your sins. I blotted them out. They don't even exist anymore. Jeremiah cries out in Jeremiah 31:34, and they shall teach no more every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, know the Lord, for they shall all know me. For from the least of them unto the greatest of them saith the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, I will remember their sin no more. That's wonderful. Jeremiah 50:20. In those days and in that time, saith the Lord, the iniquity of Israel shall be sought for, and there shall be none. The sins of Judah, and they shall not be found. For I will pardon them whom I reserve. And then in Micah 7:19, He will turn again. He will have compassion upon us. He will subdue our iniquities and will cast all our sins into the depths of the sea. He'll get rid of them, take them away into that desert place, that place of no return. And then in Psalms 103, it even describes it as further than the desert place. Listen to what it says in verse 12. As far as the east is from the west, so far hath He removed our transgressions from us. Hebrews 8:12. For I will be merciful to their unrighteousness, and their sins and their iniquities will I remember no more. Look, there's a ton of other ones that deal with this concept. That I've just picked a few out that I could share with you, but you can even think of many that I haven't mentioned that are going through your brain right now about the forgiveness of God. If the forgiveness of God was such a big deal, that God put a huge chunk of His Word about that forgiveness, we should be talking about it all the time. I mean, we should be talking about how God forgave me. You know, the most powerful witnessing tool you have is your testimony. What you were before and what you were after is the most powerful thing. No, the most intelligent atheists on the planet cannot outwit your testimony. They can't. They don't have any words for that. Changed life is the most powerful testimony of the reality of the forgiveness of God. And we need to understand that and articulate it as often as we can in our family settings, in our encounters with other people. Did you know what I was? Do you know what I am now? Do you know what God's done in my life? Do you know how He effected this change? By being born again. And you explain that to them. It's powerful. They receive forgiveness. Shall send him away by a ready man. This goat, where the sins have been confessed over it, was sent away by a ready man, by a fit man. In later years in the temple, when this same thing was done, here's how it would play out in Jerusalem. The goat would be led through Solomon's porch, where Christ was paraded on trial, and out the eastern gate, the same gate Christ rode into on Palm Sunday, to the Mount of Olives, where Christ sweat blood at Gethsemane, and really to the spot of Calvary, where you have this place that's outside of the town, outside of this walled city. And this ready man, that would take this go-away goat, in the time of Christ, they would use a non-Israelite or a Gentile, and a symbol that Israel would hand Christ over to the Gentiles. And that ready man, even though a Gentile, was welcomed back into camp once his clothes was washed and put off the old ways of sin and bathed his flesh, and that symbolizes coming to faith in Christ through the washing of regeneration. And that fit man is almost a picture of us taking Christ out to the world. I mean, our job is to take Christ to a world that doesn't know Him, and witnesses. So there's a lot of types and pictures there. So I guess maybe to sum this up, these two goats are really one goat. I mean, I think if God, they're one sacrifice. They teach one lesson. It's about the forgiveness of sin, and then the release from the guilt. And they're part and parcel of each other. They belong together. They're inseparable. They're Siamese twins. If you separate them, you kill them both, because you miss the picture. If you just send the goat away, you haven't really dealt with the cause. If you just have the sacrifice, but you don't deal with the guilt of it, you don't understand that it's sent away, that it's been removed, and that God really has forgotten what was there. Then you live in that continual bondage, and you're not free. And Satan can manipulate you with that guilt. I've seen people who, because they lived in false guilt, they didn't understand that God had already forgiven them of and God had already liberated from, they went back into a sinful lifestyle. Because they literally said, well, I'll never be good enough. Yeah, on your own flesh, you'll never be good enough. You're right, but Jesus can live His life through you, radically transforming you. And once you understand that you're forgiven and that the guilt is gone, you don't have to live in it anymore, you can walk as a brand new person, new creature with new features. That's an amazing thing. We've got a truth that could liberate, I think, a lot of people with mental illnesses, a lot of people that are in sort of emotional torment and bondage, if they could just realize that they're forgiven. That when I confess my sin to God, He literally forgives it and forgets it. That's an amazing thing about God. That's a hard thing for us to forget what other people do. God can do it. God says He can do it. One evangelist, he had a strange way of doing this, but he said he needed a picture of that sin being dealt with kind of completely. And what he would do when he would confess his sins and write them out, and then he would burn the list and flush the ashes down the toilet. I mean, get rid of it. That's what he was after, was getting rid of it, writing it down. He said he was as specific as possible to write it down what it was, and then he'd burn the list, flush the ashes to get rid of it, because he said it was gone. And I think we need to have something. I mean, I'm not saying you necessarily have to do that, but I think you have to, at least in your mind's eye, picture that sin is going away. Get rid of your goat. I don't want a goat around my house. I don't want that goat staying there eating me out of house and home, that stinky old smelly goat. Get rid of him. Get him out of those weird... You ever seen their eyes? They're weirdo eyes, man. They're like up and down and go bye. See ya. You can get out of here. I don't need that stuff. I don't want to wake up in the morning and have a goat looking at me. I mean, I knew I'd get you. My day is complete. My work is done. Let's stand. Yes. I hadn't got a good scare yet. I did it. Sister Otto, you may graduate to glory from the middle of a church service. I don't know. But there's no better way to go, really, I think. Let's pray. Mighty Jesus, we thank you for this day. God, I thank you for the sacrifice you made on Calvary that we really celebrated just very recently, days ago. We remembered on Good Friday the death that you experienced on our behalf to liberate us and to set us free. Thank you, God, for your forgiveness that can wash our sins and make them as white as snow, that can cleanse us, that can blot out iniquities, that can forgive us and remember them no more. Thank you for casting them into the sea of your forgetfulness, and thank you for sending them away into that place of no return on the go-away goat. In Jesus' name, amen.